Right, hopefully you're all there. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending this webinar. As many of you will know, I'm Steve Smedley, Associate with Acuity. And this is the first of two data workshops that we'll be running. The aim of these workshops are to help you get your data submissions right for the end of the last financial year. And to ensure data quality and the credibility of your data. And obviously the reason for that is that so everybody believes in the data and trusts it. And as we go forward with consumer metrics, I think there'll be an increasing focus on these kinds of metrics and on just getting the data quality right. So yeah, it's obviously, this is a good thing to do. The webinar will last 1.5 hours. I'll pause for questions at appropriate bits, sort of at the end of each of the themes. So if you can use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, rather than the chat, what I'll do is I'll hoover up your questions as we go, as I say, pausing at the end of each kind of logical place. And I'll do my best to answer them. I won't be able to pore through definitions and look at past discussions on, because you can imagine how complex it is. But if there's anything I can't answer, I'll get back to you all and kind of create some kind of a document that addresses any questions that I can't get to. I'm recording this, so if you really want to put yourself through it again, or you want to scroll through and look at the detail of anything, it'll be available for you and for anybody else that wants to look at it on the website. My slides in themselves are quite a useful toolkit. They'll also be available on our website. So I think that's the main housekeeping stuff. Let's see if I can share my screen. Right. I'm hoping you guys can all see that. Let's have a look. Just need to stick it on. Right, so to the avoidance of doubt, what we're doing today is a data quality workshop on repairs, lettings, collection and arrears, and satisfaction metrics. So just trying to get it into, just bear with me, sorry about this. Right, hopefully you can see it in presentation mode. So first of all, I'm going to be tackling some benchmarking basics, just so that we're all on the same page, and it's particularly useful, I think, for guys that are relatively new to this. Then we're going to get stuck into the definitions, and yeah, I do apologize now because I'm going to be doing quite a brain dump of loads of information, but hopefully it'll be useful. And as I say, the video will be there should you need it. So a little bit on benchmarking basics. When we're talking about benchmarkings, benchmarking, we're talking specifically about comparisons. That's the point of benchmarking. Other use of metrics is basically within the family of performance management, but you may or may not be comparing them. And my point very simply is that there's a lot of things that you might want to performance manage and measure, but not all of it actually needs to be compared or benchmarked. So whenever within your own organizations, you're looking at the issue of comparing stuff, doing benchmarking with others, the question is, will comparisons of such and such a metric actually provide me with some additional insight? And generally speaking, if the answer to that is yes, it's probably about exploring the variation in results, because by exploring the variation in the results of a peer group, for instance, it helps you understand why their performance is what it is. You know, what's the story behind, what is it that they're doing different? It also should help you identify those organizations that are really good at what they're doing. And then that facilitates or opens up a debate about practice and doing things in the right way. The thing to always bear in mind when you're comparing metrics is that context can be a factor. Benchmarking also helps you set targets, because if you know what good performance looks like, and that can be quantified sort of during business planning or just as part of, you know, exec team machinations, you can set your targets on good performance. The data itself, and this is something that the regulator is certainly picking up in the TSMs, is the data is extremely useful for holding the management team to account, but also for tenants to hold the board to account, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with the board. As far as benchmarking is concerned, and this is something to always remember in your clubs, is less is more. It's best to focus on getting a smaller number of metrics that you're going to compare against each other than getting all enthusiastic about it, dreaming up loads of different metrics that you could collect, and then realizing when push comes to shove, it's bloody hard to get all that data in, and the whole thing goes belly up. So best to focus on what's really, really essential and what you can really learn. One of the key thing to getting benchmarking right is to really focus on the definition. Each one of these metrics that we're talking about has a definition that sits behind it, and I'll show you how you get those in a sec. But that's what benchmarking is. It doesn't matter how you've always calculated things in your organization, or this is what the board likes. If you want to benchmark, you have to stick to a common definition. And anybody that's responsible for entering data on the system and doing this, there's almost like an obligation on them to make sure that they're au fait with those definitions and they're adhering to them the best they can. If you don't stick to the definitions, well, quite simply, it's not benchmarking, and all that brilliant credibility and trust in the data just goes out of the window. So benchmarking with Acuity, and for that matter with Housemark, is primarily, I mean, you could benchmark just about everything you like, but it's basically focusing on managed social housing. There are some metrics that are about ownership, about, you know, the landlord's responsibility, but generally we're interested in the management of social housing. So you'll see a number of the metrics, like particularly around, say, arrears and collection and voids. It's about who's managing that social stock. There might be a different owner, but we're interested in the performance of the manager here. Obviously, for most organizations, ownership and management is the same thing. What do we mean by primary forms of social housing? We mean general needs housing, housing for older people, and support. And if you want to get the definitions of what we mean by general needs, housing for older people and support, if you go into the website, which looks a bit like this, and you click on the data entry tab, the first thing you'll come to is where you enter your actual performance indicators in. But the second thing here, housing association profile, is where you put some of your contextual data. And in there, you'll find chapter and verse about what is and isn't general needs housing for older people, whatever. So most of our benchmarking is about those three forms of social housing. There are some limited exceptions in the financial metrics, which we're not covering today, because they cover the entire organization, whether you're doing private rented, home ownership, all that kind of stuff, because some of those financial metrics cover, basically the entire business and the profit made from the entire business. And that spans both social and non-social housing. So going back to this profile page, I just want to flag that it's actually quite important. So before you actually get entering your data, your various results of your metrics in the PI data option, the HA profile allows you to put essential business context. So, how much stock you've got, of what type, what your turnover is, what your staffing levels are, or whatever. So it puts your, if you like, your PI data in context. And the reason why that's so useful is because if you want to run a report or you want to do some bespoke benchmarking, you could handpick organizations that have a more similar business to you, that follow a similar business model, like they might have 30% supported housing and 70% general needs housing, just like you. So by you updating that profile data, it enables you to contextualize your data, but it enables other organizations to actually pick fair comparisons if they're doing bespoke benchmarking. So just make sure that that's your profile tab is up to date. And so, as I was saying, the kind of info on the profile tab is this kind of info. This isn't it all, but it's some of the main bits, but it just gives you a sense of what's there. So obviously what we're actually benchmarking, as I said, is these key bits of social housing, but we've got this other information in here, as I say, because it's really useful as context. And this is really useful as context, these numbers, so that you can do that split that I was talking about. So straight away, you can see with this organization is mainly about general needs properties. It's got a fair whack of housing for older people, and it's got a little bit of support. So there we go. That's your profile tab, little plug for it. Going back to the benchmarking basics, just remember that these metrics and the results from these metrics aren't the be all and the end all. And the regulator looks at them in this way as well. It's the start of a journey. It's the start of a process. And that's what that little diagram is below. It should be the primer for you to delve into your business, to understand what's going on, to draw. It's about analyzing the results, understanding variation, as I said before, and drawing insight from it so that you can make evidence-based decisions about where you might deploy your resources, whether they're financial or staff-based. And they also help you to focus your improvement work. As I've said before, they help you set targets too. All of this makes you more accountable. So sort of to the external world, what I've just said as a business analysis tool, that's kind of inward facing about you sharpening up what you do. To the outside world, obviously it enables you to be transparent and accountable. It also should provide your board, your exec team, and actually the regulator that if you're using the data in this way, that it should provide all parties with assurance that you've got a grip of cost and performance, that you understand how your context impacts both cost and performance. So as I say, benchmarking really isn't the answer, it's the starting point. There are limitations with metrics. These metrics won't tell you everything that you need to know. They need to be complemented by a story, as I say, that you develop from analyzing the metrics to explain why the metrics are doing what they're doing. The metrics should be looked at in the round, where you're doing the proverbial VFM balancing act of looking at all your kind of your satisfaction outcome and your performance indicators versus how much things are costing. So you kind of saying, well, you know, what kind of performance are we getting for the costs that we're putting into it? It's also about loading in other data that sits alongside the metrics, like qualitative data, like feedback from your tenants, even tenant scrutiny work, that kind of stuff. So basically, it's part of a whole bunch of different data, qualitative, quantitative, that you're evaluating to understand exactly how you are. You should never look at individual metrics in isolation, because there might be a counterpoint to that particular metric that tells a different story. So, you know, whilst you're jumping up and down and saying, isn't it brilliant how, just look how low our arrears are, well, that might not be so good if you've deliberately massaged down your arrears by just taking a massive hit on void loss, or because you're just not, you know, you're just turning arrears into FTAs or whatever. So, you know, that's if that's done in a very contrived fashion, that's gaming, and nobody likes that. Definitions don't actually legislate for every eventuality. What I'm actually covering are the main things you need to know about the definitions. Finer points of definitions, quite often the clubs are a really good place to actually discuss that kind of stuff and really try and hammer out different interpretations. And just a little, you know, just a little word at this point about the TSMs. The regulator will be introducing a good 22, 23 performance indicators that you will have to collect, mandatory. So the question is, where does that leave benchmarking, like what we're doing here? Well, clearly, I'm guessing that you'll want to collect those TSMs via Acuity or whatever. And that is going to beg the question, going back to my previous point about less is more, is if you're going to be collecting all the regulatory metrics, it puts your existing metrics in sharp focus. So I'm guessing that a worthy topic at summer meetings that you have when you look at your annual report might be, bearing in mind that we're going to be collecting the regulators from 2023 to 24, how many of these are we likely to want to keep going? And my last little bit there in red is just to remind you all of just some statistical lingo. Most metrics kind of take this kind of format where you've got a number, you have a numerator that is divided by a nominator, and that gives you the result. So as I go through what I'm about to go through, and I'm talking about a numerator, I'm talking about the number on the top. When I'm talking about a denominator, I'm talking about the number on the bottom. So I hope that's okay. I'm going to keep on going through the first lot, and then the first theme, and then I'll pause for some questions. So do get your questions coming in. Let's have a look at the next lot. Oh, right, hang on. No, I haven't got there yet. Yeah, just one last word about the definitions. This is what your data entry form looks like. So previously, I clicked on the profile tab. If I picked on the PI data tab, I'd get this, and this is where you enter all of your PI results when you do your data submission. And you just, for those of you that do an annual data, you simply put your results here in the Q4 box, obviously. The rest of these are for those of you that might collect quarterly or half yearly. So your definitions are available simply by clicking on a little question mark. So all the content that you're about to get now, I've hoovered up from clicking on those little question marks so I could go through the definitions with you. So our first theme is lettings and voids. So as I go through these metrics, do use the Q&A function to ask anything that you want about it, and I will do my best to answer it. So with lettings and voids, these metrics that you're collecting, because bearing in mind there's a lot of you out there that are from all over the country with different client groups. Lettings and voids metrics tend to be divided by your different key social housing group client groups. So, those of you that are primarily GN focused will be collecting the GN, the general needs version of this, because obviously, a lot of you will know this, that kind of letting a general needs dwelling is different to letting, say, a supported or a HFOP dwelling. And that's, quite often you're trying to match exactly with support or whatever, you're trying to match the right person to the specific supported accommodation. And that's why we tend to split these up. All of them borrow heavily from core definitions. And so the metrics we're going to look at are the key ones that have the various prefixes so that you can identify them. We're going to be looking at percentage of rent lost through dwellings being vacant, otherwise known as void loss. We're going to be looking at the average relet time indicator. And the third one that we're going to be looking at is relets as a percentage of stock. So here we go. The first one is the void loss indicator. And what's the point of this indicator? It tells you something about the optimum use of social assets and revenue maximization. The idea is that social housing is a limited social good, and it needs to be utilized to its absolute max where possible. And it also tells us something about a return on investment foregone, if you like, from an unlet asset. The key thing to remember about this metric, unlike the average void turnaround metric that we'll be looking at next, is this actually includes major works. So it really is looking at all of your voids to understand how your assets, regardless of their status, are losing money for you, in a sense. So the calculation is the rent and service charges lost due to the dwellings being vacant, divided by the gross rent and service charges receivable. And all of that is just multiplied out by 100. So it gives you it as a percent. So let's take a closer look at the denominator and what they mean by, and the denominators, the number on the bottom, remember. The gross rent and service charges receivable, what they mean, the total potential rent and service charges collectible for the period for all the dwellings, if all the dwellings had been occupied. So basically, if you'd let all of your dwellings that you're managing, what could you have got in rent and service charges from them? And you should be, the dwelling can have been vacant for any reason. And it includes those that in old school, or what you say on court, are unavailable to let. So it really does include any of your major works voids and anything that you're holding for decant. If any of your unavailable to let are never going to be let as social housing dwellings again, that is, you're basically waiting to demolish them. They can be excluded from the entire calculation. They don't appear above or below that line. You just ignore them. So, as I say, this really is looking to capture all of your voids, except those that you're just holding because you're going to demolish them. Simple as that. If you're collecting this one quarterly, the numerator is just simply the year-to-date rent and service loss. And the denominator is the pro rata annual rent and service charge. It's as simple as that. And obviously, if you were going to collect it at 6 months, you would simply take it year to date as well and pro rata, the annual rent and service charge. So again, I'll just reiterate that this one includes major works, unlike this one, which excludes major works. So this is what's known as your average relet time in calendar days. And what's the point of this metric? Whereas the other point, the point of the other metric was really about understanding the utilization of social housing assets and, if you like, the money lost on those social assets. This is really about zooming into a key business process and just how efficient and adept you are at running this process. It really just zooms into the majority of your voids, which are going to be standard and routine relets, bog standard voids, no major works, etc., etc. So the calculation is the total number of days of standard relet properties, the total number of days that standard relet properties were vacant in whatever period we're talking about, and the number of standard relet lettings in the period. Simple as that. So unpacking that, the number of days vacant are the number of days between the tenancy end date and the tenancy start date. And what we mean by calendar days is there are 7 days in a week. You're not back in the old days or whatever. I remember this being calculated by a working week, which was 5 days. This is about counting 7 days in a week. The day a property goes vacant does not count, nor does it the day it's let, because it's let. So here's the point with this. You can get a 0 days relet, but you can never get a negative. You know, it doesn't matter if you've teed somebody up and, you know, they're kind of waiting there with their bags as the other person. You can't get a negative relet. What do we mean by a bog standard or a standard or routine void? We're definitely talking about, this is not a major works void. It's not a new let. It's not a succession. It's not an exchange. And we're not talking about voids held for decant. Because this is just focusing on standard and routine, any kind of funny business like major works, successions, etc., anything that's not standard or routine comes out of the calculation. So they don't count above or below the line in the numerator or denominator. And if you've got any major works, once those major works are completed, they don't become one of these voids at all. Once a major work, always a major work. If you've got something that is a major works void, it will never find its way into these stats at all. They will always be separate. So obviously all of this comes down to the definition of what major works is, so that you can net them off from this, get them out of it. So I'll come to that on the next slide. And the other thing about this is it's a bittersweet thing, is for those of you that have really struggled to let some voids, the success of finally letting that voids feels a bit hollow, because as soon as it's let, that's when you count it. So your reward for letting that is that it'll actually make your void stats look a bit sick, because that's the point that you actually start counting it. So what's a major work void? This is really important, because this is basically at the crux of this metric, but also if ever you calculate major works voids internally yourself, just to see how long it's taking you to turn around major works voids, this is the kind of definition you need so that you can identify what a major work void is. The acid test for it is that it couldn't reasonably be carried out with a tenant in situ, i.e. if there was a tenant in that dwelling and you wanted to do those works, you would have to decant them. So that's the acid test. And then digging behind that, what kind of work might actually mean that you have to do that? Well, back in the day, and these are still serviceable as part of the definition, we are talking about essential structural works, site works around the area, which are typically about the health and safety. We're talking about major service installations, and also work that significantly improves the dwelling. Now, I've flagged this because I know a number of organizations, rather than have some kind of major planned works program that does all the improvement, they'll often do significant improvement when the property is empty. So with those voids that you have, that you're taking the opportunity to significantly improve them, you could exclude them from this metric, because providing they pass that decant test. So if you were to ask yourself, are the works that I'm going to be doing to this void, are they so extensive that actually, if the previous tenant had been in there and we'd done it, we would have decanted them? Well, they're major works, and so they need not actually appear in this metric. Right. And I think this is the final one in voids and lettings. So this is hang on. Yeah, so this is your relets as a percentage of stock. It's this, I'm struggling to read it because I've got a little bar that's sitting above it, so I can't actually read my titles. So the rationale of this, I believe, it's essentially providing context to the previous indicators that we've just had a look at. And this one indicates churn. And the reason why I think it's more contextual is it's not necessarily to do with performance. It could be to do with performance. It could be to do with the fact that you're not looking after your tenants and they want to keep moving all the time. It could be that, but equally it could be you've got a client group where, frankly, there's a high turnover, and that's part of your social mission, like, for instance, in supported housing, where you're moving people through your dwellings. So by itself, I think it's a bit suspect if you were to kind of say this is a performance measure. It's not necessarily performance, but I think it helps you understand the other metrics. So the calculation is the number of properties relet during the period divided by the number of properties managed. Again, you multiply it out to 100 to get a percentage. Again, and I mentioned this in the preamble, the definition zooms in on the fact that these are relets as a proportion of the units managed, because it's interested to see its primary interest is to see how well this process is being managed. So if you happen, if you've got stock and it's not managed by you, you should actually be excluding it, because this is really, as I say, zooming in on the management of this function and not necessarily the ownership. And sometimes you get these discrepancy with some of these long-standing metrics, because it's just, they're various snapshots of where we were at a point in history when a certain metric was developed. And the reason why they've been perpetuated in the way that they have is obviously for time series analysis, so that people can see the trend, because people try to avoid messing with definitions unless absolutely necessary. And just with, as with void loss, this really is about including all dwellings vacant for any reason except where they're not going to be used for social housing again. So just remember, there's a this kind of correlates or whatever, or it sits alongside that void loss in that it's trying to look at something quite similar. It's looking at all of your vacants for any reason, and not just kind of trying to zoom in on, you know, standard voids or anything like that. So I'm just going to, pause there a second and look at some of your questions. I don't know if you can see the questions on my screen as well. Right, so I'm actually doing this as I go, so I'm going to have to be thinking off the top of my head. So I do apologize if I completely stuff this up. But as I say, anything that I do a bad job on, I'll get in touch with you all and respond. Right, I think, Lynn's just struggled a little bit with logging on. Helen's saying percentage of rent loss through dwellings being vacant question, and then I'm guessing this is a question: does this exclude properties that have been purchased and are undergoing major refurbishments and have not yet been let? Yes, this is about relets. So you would be excluded, off the top of my head, actually, but I'm fairly sure this is about relets. Yes, we're not including new properties here. So, and in any case, no, I'll leave it at that. Definitely exclude those, because they've only just come on stream, and we are focusing on relets. And so, done. And Matthew's saying, are we including intermediate rent properties as because they're social rented? Matthew, we're not. Again, you may have missed the first preamble bit. Most of benchmarking that we're doing, the vast majority of it is about looking at the primary forms of social housing. And by that, I mean general needs, supported, and housing for older people. So intermediate rent doesn't play into that. It's just very much the others. Although, you know, knowing that you've got intermediate rent, as I say, on your profile page, we pick up that by way of context, but we're not benchmarking it. Andrew, hi Andrew. Major works void. Andrew is saying, are you saying that if the work could be done with a tenant in situ, for example, a kitchen replacement, that you can't count it as a major works void? Regrettably, I am saying that. The decant test is the acid test. I know part of that major works definition was saying substantial improvement work. But at the end of the day, the decant test, I think, is the thing that's really driving this. And we know that with a lot of planned work, that you can actually work around the tenant, shufty them about, stick a little community kitchen in, blah blah blah. So if you can do it with the tenant in situ, it ain't major works. Sounded a bit harsh, that, but there you go. That's what the definition says. Sandra. Hi, Sandra. Would full DCP be classed as major works, plastering and new heating systems? DCP, are we talking about, is that putting membranes in and stuff like that? The point is, extensive plastering, I guess, new heating systems, if you really have to move that person out, it all comes back to the decant test. So I guess my point is what would you do if if that property was tenanted? Would you be looking to decant them? If so, it's major works. If not, if you could work around them, it ain't major works. God, I sound very cruel. I've done that one. Cassandra, following up answer about intermediate rent. What about affordable rent? Right, affordable rent. Well, God, it's one of those semantic things. It is a social rent, but here's the thing: we're not counting. Oh no, we are. We're not differentiating. We are not differentiating as far as affordable is concerned. Just about any other form of social rent is coming out, but since like affordable is almost like stepped into old school social rents in their place, thanks to Grant Shapps knocking it all on the head back in the day. No, we are. It's okay for your affordable to fall in with the other forms of social housing that I've already said. That is general needs supported and HFOP. So yes, include those, but those other types like immediate, intermediate, various forms of shared ownership, even if they're staircased up to 99.9%, they're not included. We're also excluding leaseholders. We're also excluding private rents, student accommodation, key worker accommodation. None of that is included, but we will. Oh, sorry, I know I'm getting confused. Sorry, you are excluding your intermediate rent. We'll edit that out, right? You're excluding your intermediate. I'm getting confused with affordable. We'll take your affordable in this because, as I say, that's what's replaced your old school social rents, right? Intermediate is still, although it may be regarded as social housing, isn't part of this exercise. Is interesting context. Sorry for stuffing that up, but hopefully that's clear. So affordable, yes. Intermediate, no. No student accommodation, no key worker accommodation, etc., etc. No private stuff, no shared ownership. God. Yes, damp-proof course. I would say with your damp-proof course, as I say, it's everything I've said previously, and I can imagine with the damp-proof membrane, definitely where you're digging up the floor and sticking in a membrane. You probably can't really work around the tenant there, but if it's a damp-proof course, you're just injecting walls, and you're not going to poison them with whatever chemicals you're using. If you can work around them, and you would normally work around them, well, it's not a major works for you. Jill, hi Jill. Reference the query about including replacement bathrooms and kitchens as major work. What about sheltered housing? Where where we would never do either while the tenant was in the property, as is often far too due to tenant's age, despite there being communal kitchen and bathroom. Jill, the point is you see, none of this is hard and fast. It's you have to be true to how you would deal with it as an organization. And this is a really good example of where, because of the client group, and it might be for other forms of support as well, because the client group is particularly vulnerable and perhaps not as robust as others, if you would typically decant them to do that kind of work, well, for you, it's a major work void, but for poor old Andrew Furtek with his general needs, it might not be one. That's the vagaries of this. Hope that's okay. And Andrew's back saying, yes, where he wants the definition of a long-term void. Can I email it? Right, I could do both, but let me show you, right? What you may have done, Andrew, is, oh, let's have a look. Oh God, there must be a quick way of doing this. Right, in my preamble, right, so on your data entry page, for all of the metrics, as I was saying before, this is where you stick in your results, and it's a good discipline for if anybody's got any doubt, is to click on the little blue question mark, and that will give you the full definition for every single metric, so you can make sure you or whoever you delegated it to is definitely getting it right. You could even turn it into a fun performance management session for that member of staff if you wanted. And so as far as major works is concerned, Andrew, you'll actually find it in this average relet time definition. I know yours is probably general needs or whatever, but it will be there. And so you'll get chapter and verse there. So I hope that's okay. I'll just scroll forward. I hope none of you have started self-harming yet with this, because it is 1.5 hours of looking at benchmarking. You know, it could be that you've all really been evil in a previous life, and you're actually in that special part of hell that Dante referred to in Inferno, where you just look at benchmarking definitions for the rest of eternity. Let's have a look. So I think we're, oh God, I really overshot, didn't I? We're now on to rent collection and arrears metrics. Again, just like the other lot, these ones tend to be differentiated by client group. So, you know, some of you will just be collecting this as a kind of a general needs thing. Some of you will be collecting as support. Again, because, you know, different client groups have different experiences. You know, generally, if you've got housing for older people, you might be quite surprised to see high arrears, whereas perhaps for some of you general needs guys or some of you supported guys, you might not. So these are differentiated. The metrics we're going to look at are rent collected as a percentage of rent owed, current arrears as a percentage of the annual rent debit, and then and this is a little bit of a minority sport because not all of you do this, but a reasonable number do. So that's why I included it. It's the rent arrears. It's a version of the one immediately above it, but this is the one where you net off unpaid housing benefit. And of course, that metric was created so that you could deal with called technical arrears back in the day. So the problem with this metric, the one in the middle, is obviously if you've got, depending on where you are in the housing benefit cycle, when you measure it, like at the end of a quarter or even, you know, at the end of the year, it might just be timed really badly for when your benefit comes in. And so that statistic might look a bit sicker than it needs to be. But the point is, with that metric, the one in the middle, you don't get to fiddle with housing benefit, even if it's really cruel and a shed load of benefits going to come in tomorrow. Hard luck, you can't fiddle with it. Whereas this one, you can allow for that coming in. It deals with technical arrears. So that's just the distinction there, which I'll go over in a sec. So again, I can't actually see the title of this. Yeah, so this is the rent collection. What's the point of this metric? It's a bit like that your voids turnaround indicator, your voids average. It's about zooming into a key business process. And, you know, obviously it's quite interested to make sure that you're maximizing your income. So the calculation is your actual rent and service charge income received year to date. And the reason it's saying received year to date there is so that for those that collect it quarterly, they're counting it at the end of the quarter. So actual rent and service charge income received year to date divided by the actual rent and service charges due year to date, or multiplied by 100. So I've explained why you've got year to date there. It's to deal with quarters. This metric, unlike the arrears metric, which is coming up next, is only interested in the effectiveness of your current collection process. Whereas the next metric, the arrears metric, reflects a historical position and is particularly good over time looking at trend, i.e. watching how your arrears are coming down. Whereas this isn't bothered about historic arrears because the clock starts ticking at the start of April and it stops ticking the following March, and it's just looking at how well you're getting in the money that's due during that period. Simple as that. So here's the thing with this, because you're excluding, you're not interested in arrears before, you know, April 1st or whatever it is actually possible to score over 100% on this. And the reason you'd be scoring over 100% on it is that you're making headway into those historic arrears. Garages are not included in this metric in any way above or below the line. So zooming in a bit on some of the wording, the numerator, when we say actual rent and service charge income received in the period, as I've said, you are not fiddling for late housing benefit. You just suck it up. You just take it on the chin. Whatever the position is at the end of that period, that's what the answer is. And you're not adjusting for any prepayments or post payments either. This is zooming in on collection. What did you collect? Simple as that. Some exclusions from this. So if as part of your collection, you're collecting non-rent and service charge items, so anything that isn't strictly speaking the rent for a current tenant and the service charge, if there's any way that you can do it, your systems allow you to do it, you should be excluding them. So if you're collecting on other people's behalf, stuff like water rates, if you're collecting court costs from previous action, repairs, recharges, overpaid housing benefit, right? They should be excluded if you can. If you can't split them out, you need to be including them above and below them. As far as the denominator is concerned, you should be excluding any void rent loss. You are only counting tenanted properties. So if you like, void rent loss is the complement to this. So this is getting a metric on how well you're doing on those, on any tenanted property, whereas void rent loss is zooming in on the money that you're losing through it not being rented out. So the two are kind of different views of your overall, if you like, maximizing your income. The other exclusion, as I've said, is any arrears that exist for these tenancies in the year before. So as time passes on with this indicator, as the 1st of April rolls forward to the following 31st of March, the only arrears that should ever feature in this indicator are arrears that are accrued over the year that we're looking at it. So if somebody was to score 99% on this metric at the end of the financial year, we know from that indicator that they've managed to knock up 1% arrears over the past year, which will obviously go on to whatever arrears that they had before the 1st of April. Similarly, if somebody scored 101% on this, we would know that they've made a 1% inroad on their historic arrears. So I hope that's okay. Marching on. Again, I can't see this one. Oh, so this is arrears. So, so if the other one's about understanding your current performance on rent collection, this is looking at that you've got effective processes for driving down your historical arrears. And as I've said, it's, perhaps it is a good benchmarking metric. I think it's probably a better performance metric for you to just understand your performance over time rather than a comparator. But I think where it might be useful as a comparator is where you're looking at the extent to which your peers are making inroads, either faster or slower than yourself. So the calculation is actual current tenant rent and service charge arrears at the period end divided by the annual rent and service charge debit for the current financial year, excluding void loss. So again, just like the last one, we're not interested in void loss in this. Now, because that denominator, the number on the bottom there, is for the current financial year, it does create a little bit of a problem for those people, and it's a bit of a minority sport, this, but those people that collect it quarterly, it's a bit difficult, because if you imagine, if at the end of the first quarter, you're having to come up with an annual rent and service debit for the current financial year, excluding void loss, well, you don't know what voids you're going to get, and you're only a quarter into the year, so you have to kind of dream up a figure for that. So all I've done at the very bottom of this slide for posterity, I'm not going to go into it in massive detail because only some of you do it, but it solves that problem for you. I've given you a kind of the fix of how you get around that problem. But anyway, going back to what you all need to know about it, what you exclude from this is void loss. You also exclude those court costs, sundry debts, garages, blah, blah, blah. Just the same as the previous metric. Also, arrears from any previous tenancies, FTAs. So this really is just zooming in to the arrears of current tenancies. That's the point. Anything else is netted off, is dealt with elsewhere as an FTA or whatever. Now, because this is about arrears, you have to exclude advance payments and credits. So I don't know if you remember in the collection one that we've just done, if you had prepayments or anything, advance payments, they were okay. But that's because we were looking at collection. We are asking the question, what is it that you collected? So obviously you did collect that, and so it's included in that. But because this is really focused on arrears, a true picture of your arrears, you can't have advance payments in there and credits, because they're not, you know, those if those prepayments are offsetting your actual arrears position, they're making your arrears position look better than it really is, because at any point those punters with those credits on can ask for the money back. So you have to net them off. And exactly the same as with the previous metric, you can make no adjustments for late housing benefit here. You just have to suck it up. It's whatever the score was at the end of the period, whether that's 31st of March, or it's like 31st of December or whatever. And I've already explained the little bit down here about the quarterly payments. That's there. As I say, these slides will be available, so you can have a look at that in your own time, but it sorts it out for you. So I've mentioned the arrears metric net of unpaid housing benefit. This is it. It has those prefixes SWBM 400, 410, depending on your client group. What's the point of this metric? It's identical to the previous metric, your arrears metric, but as I've said before, this allows you to adjust for the housing benefit cycle and deals with those technical arrears. And so it's absolutely the same as the last metric, except you simply exclude arrears due to late housing benefit payment, and that is it. Right, I'm going to pause there again because they were the arrears ones, and I will do some Q&As. Right, so Lynn's off. You see, there's only so much definitions you can take. Stephen Bauer's saying metric 220, I think, where we have arrangements in place where we can charge landlords for void rooms or sleep-in rooms, can our debt relating to these rooms be adjusted from our current tenant arrears balance? Gosh, I've never heard this one before. It's charge landlords for void rooms. I think, okay. I would have to, that is such an unusual question. I'd probably need more information on the basis of it. What I'll do, Stephen, is, yeah, if we can talk outside this meeting, I've got my email details. I think we should knock that one off outside this meeting so I can just understand exactly what the arrangement is. But suffice to say, any of the definitions will be silent on this. So it'll have to be a case of trying to, if you like, look at what the metric was intending and interpreting on that basis. But yes, if we can get in touch outside of this, we'll sort that one out. Brilliant. Let's have a look. Okay. Right, so we'll crack on because I realize time's marching on. I do hope this is helpful. As I say, anything that I can't do, just my details are on the final slide. Just contact me outside of the meeting. Right, there's a whole watch of these that I'm going to canter through because looking at this, it just looks a bit cruel. So repairs and maintenance. So unlike the previous metrics that are all divvied up by client group primarily, these aren't. These just apply across your stock regardless of whether what clients sit in them. So the metrics we're about to look at are the average number of responsive repairs, the percentage of repairs completed at the first visit, average end-to-end time for all reactive repairs, percentage of residents satisfied with the most recent repair, and then our gas metrics. So I'm now going to crack on with so the average number of responsive repairs per unit. Again, for me, it's one of those metrics that is much possibly more to do with context than performance, really. It's a useful can opener. You know, if we had a high number for this, and I guess a high number might be anything, you know, north of 3 or whatever. It could be 4, 5, I don't know. A high number, it might point to poor diagnostics. It might point to poor application of the repairs policy by frontline staff. It might mean poor quality of repairs, but equally, it could be, it might say something about the quality of your stock or your tenant profile, i.e. that you've got tenants that require more intensive management, if you like. So the calculation is the total number of responsive repairs orders issued during the period divided by the total number of units where the landlord is responsible for responsive repairs. So the thing with any of these metrics that are to do with responsive or reactive repairs, the definition of what we mean by such a repair is key. And what do we mean? We mean all minor, ad hoc, or unplanned repairs, regardless of priority, that are reported by tenants or arise from damage, wear and tear to communal or common parts. So that's what a reactive repair is for these repairs. And that the defect is the landlord's responsibility for making good. And if you're really desperate to understand where the landlord's responsibility is, go check out the Act. We are really talking about counting jobs here rather than SOR lines. So as we know, depending on how you do things, your SORs, a single job might be made up of a whole bunch of different SOR tasks. It's really not an exact science. There is differential practice here. And where you get differential practice is where some organizations tend to batch a bunch of things together and call it one job. But this is a kind of stuff where, as I say, definitions can only take you so far. This is where the clubs come in really handy, when you can kind of discuss this kind of differential practice to provide you with context and understanding behind these metrics within the clubs. So you should be excluding any, because we're just talking about reactive, responsive repairs. Obviously, you should be disregarding, excluding any repairs undertaken as part of planned maintenance, or quite specifically a predetermined, because predetermined is the opposite of reactive or responsive. So if, for instance, there's a gas inspection that results in a job being done, that isn't a responsive repair. That the job that happens as a result of that inspection is actually part of a predetermined maintenance program, and that even extends to, say, making good. So let's say in this gas, I'm completely making this up, and I was always a bit rubbish at repairs, but let's say someone's gone in, looked at your boiler, spotted a problem with the exhaust, the flue leading to the external of the building. They have to do all kinds of jiggery pokery. That means that a plasterer has to go in, and then even a decorator afterwards to make good where that exhaust goes out of the building. They would actually count as, they wouldn't count in this indicator, because they are jobs falling out of a predetermined maintenance program. Obviously, you should be excluding voids repairs from this because they are a separate thing. This is one of the most problematic of the mainstream metrics that you guys collect. I've got real problems with it. I've been grumbling about it for ages. I don't know. Yeah, you might want to think about killing it off at some time, not least because the regulators very unlikely to be going with this. For those of you that pored over, again, all 3 billion pages of the regulator's consultation on its TSMs, you'll note that they didn't go for this, even though it was asked for in the white paper. And that's because of all the problems with this. So what are the problems? Originally, back in the day, it was trying to expose poorly diagnosed, trained, organised and equipped council services. It was just another way to put the boot into councils. And what they were trying to do with this indicator was encourage the use of multi-trade operatives, men in vans largely, although there were some women, with impressed stock on the vans. That's what they were trying to do with this indicator. Since this indicator was spawned 15 years ago, it's been tweaked so many times, it's looking like some mad Heath Robinson thing. And so the tweaks just make it clunky. And it still fails to pick up that many of you guys in practice, right, you'll go out, your tenants are quite happy for the operative to turn up, realise what's needed, nick out to B&Q, get the bits, bish, bosh, bosh, job done, everyone's happy. But guess what? You don't get to say the job's done first time on this because that's actually 2 visits or whatever. And so, it's unfortunate, but there you go. And as I say, there are so many caveats and qualifications on this, and you can't have the scenario that I've just said. And it just makes this metric so unsatisfactory because, I mean, the other things that you can exclude from it down the bottom of the page there are, so you can't have the fella nicking off and getting the parts and coming straight back. He's only gone like half an hour. You can't have that. But what you can do is you can exclude diagnostic pre-inspections because it was decided at some point in the past that this metric should just be about remedial action, right? But when this metric was conceived, it wasn't. It was supposed to capture the diagnostics as well. So this perfectly legitimate exclusion, I think, originally goes against the original point of this metric. That's allowed, but nicking off to B&Q isn't. The other things that you should exclude are access, sort of where you can't get access, because it is just about the repair. And that's obviously completely legit, that one. It's somewhat silent about communal repairs. It doesn't differentiate. But again, I would argue what this metric was about originally was about tenant requests for repairs, and it was about the inconvenience to them of multiple visits. So I would say this shouldn't apply to communal repairs. And I'm working all over the place here. It should. One of the tweaks now is that it does allow for multiple trade visits where it's absolutely essential and known in advance. So where a job requires multiple trades, and typically, it could be like the example that I said, but I'll use a different one. Let's say, someone's had to replace a window frame. So you've had a glazier go in, do that, followed by a plasterer, followed by a decorator, right? Providing all of that's going to happen in that kind of sequence up front, which, let's face it, you would know, you can actually claim that that would be done first time, so that so long as each one of those trades does the job in one visit. Now, I have gone from the top of this to the bottom of it, worked my way up to the middle, and I do apologize for that, because I think what I've been trying to convey is just how flaky this metric is, and probably why the regulator isn't going to include it in its TSM suite, unless there's like riots, down in London, that they really wanted this in. I'm just saying that this metric is really, really deeply flawed. But this one slide tells you how you should deal with it in general. Things have been tweaked so that some things have been accepted, i.e. the multi-trade visits, right? Yet there seem to be other, for me, irrational exclusions, like the fella nipping out to B&Q, and it not including diagnostic pre-inspections, because the point is that with the pre-inspections is the tenant wanted everything done in one hit, and so there wasn't supposed to be a pre-inspection in the first. So the whole thing's confounded. I'm not going to waste any more time on it, but if you want to get it right, it's all on this slide. So now we're on to average end-to-end time for all reactive repairs. This was brought in a few years ago, and it was supposed to knock on the head the metric that's about to come up, which is those percentage repairs completed on target, broken into the 3 different time bands that we all know and love, right? The reason this was brought in was because so many people thought that those 3 time-banded ones that are about to come up are so flaky, because they're not even proper benchmarks. Because the point is each organization can define what its target is. So you can have some organizations that might have quite onerous, stiff targets, and you could have other organizations that have easy targets, frankly. So obviously the guys that set an easy target can outperform an organization that's actually set a hard target, but they've missed their target, but they're actually performing better than the organization that set a rubbish target. This is why these are just not great comparisons. They're probably really good for you to calculate and keep and give to board members if they want to understand how you're performing against your own service promise to your tenants. But you can see how they're a bit rough as benchmarks, really. The other reason this newer indicator, the percentage repairs completed, the average end-to-end time was introduced, was that there was a general sense that tenants generally want a timely service, and by your overall average being a smaller number, that should suggest the timeliness of your repairs. What it doesn't tell us is anything about the satisfaction, of course. It just tells us that you've done things in a timely fashion. So the calculation is the sum of the total number of calendar days. We know what a calendar day is. It's 7 days in a week. Sum of the total number of calendar days taken to complete responsive repairs in the period. The total number of responsive repairs completed in the period. So the average number, in terms of zooming in on some of that wording, the average number of calendar days between a responsive repair being requested and its satisfactory completion, and it includes the day of request and the day of completion. So yeah, the day of request comes in is day 1, and the day of completion is your final day that you count. It's as simple as that. And it's landlord discretion in terms of saying when that repair is actually completed. So here are those kind of what I think are slightly flaky, dated metrics that, absolutely worthy that you monitor them yourselves, and your board keeps a view on them. But I do think they're a bit flaky as a comparison, possibly with the exception of the emergency repairs, because I think most people have got an emergency repairs time of a day. And so I think in most cases, the target time is the same there. And I actually think that is worthy, because if you've got an emergency repair, you do want to know that they are being knocked off within the target time. So I'll backtrack a little bit. That one is all right. So as I say, I've already spoken to this quite a bit. I think it's dated. It was there again, a bit like the doing the job in one hit that we've already covered. It was there really to just get councils being a bit more responsive. The definitions for these three metrics, it is worth you, if you are going to collect this, it is worth you looking at the definitions, because under each one, it does suggest the kind of repairs that might fall into the various bands. But what I'd say is there's still a bit of wiggle room there for people to move about between the bands. And as I've said, just have a think about just how useful this is to you as a benchmark, not as an internal metric. And one of the reasons why you should always critically look to within your clubs to kill off some of these metrics is, if you bear in mind, we're going to get the 22-23 TSMs coming live in 2023 to 24. You're going to be collecting all of those. It will put pressure on some of these metrics. And I'm just saying there's some low-hanging fruit here with some iffy metrics that, if you're going to be collecting all the TSM ones, and there's so many of the acuity metrics, existing acuity metrics that you want to keep going with, you really do want to be getting rid of the deadwood here. And top tip, this is deadwood. Right, the metric percentage of residents satisfied with the most recent repair. Since STAR was reviewed a couple of years ago, this is now one of the new core questions anyway. It is asked as a transactional question, and because it's part of the STAR suite, it should conform to the STAR methodology. So I won't go into that now, because I'm going to come to the satisfaction metrics. And so obviously, whatever I say in that section applies to this specific metric. So in terms of our gas metrics, this is the old one that many of you still collect, which is the percentage of dwellings with a valid gas safety certificate. Clearly, the rationale here is it gives everybody assurance that you're complying with legal requirements. And hopefully, if you stay on top of it, nobody from your organization goes to prison. The calculation is the number of dwellings with a current valid gas safety certificate at the end of the period. And everybody collects this on an annual basis. So obviously this is the 31st of March is the end of the period. So number of dwellings with current valid gas safety certificate on 31st of March divided by the number of dwellings the landlord has a gas safety obligation for. So let's expand that. The landlord must have a copy of the certification to be able to count it. And in terms of the denominator, the number on the bottom, the number of rented dwellings in ownership that have a connected gas supply. So we are never talking about all of your stock in ownership. We're only talking about those of your rented dwellings that have a connected gas supply. That's the first thing. Where you may have disconnected a gas supply, you can exclude them from the calculation. But you need an appropriate, if you like, audit trail that you can exclude it. Where you've got tenanted properties with disconnected gas pipework, you should only exclude them if there's a record of an annual check to verify that the gas supply is still disconnected. Yeah, so they're the caveats. So of course, the point with this is this metric is a snapshot on the 31st of March. And what you could have done with this is you could have had gas certificates going out of date over the previous 12 months. And then in the last 2 months before the 31st of March, you go hell for leather, willy-nilly, trying to make sure that you've got 100% gas safety certs on the 31st of March, right? So this next indicator seeks to avoid that. So the percentage of gas safety certs, safety checks completed within period is similar to the other one, but it's not a snapshot. What this does, this metric does, is it will capture any gas safety inspections that fell outside the 12-month deadline. So there's no running around at the end of the year trying to get all your certs. If at any point any of your certs went past their 12-month sell-by date, as it were, you have to count them. So that's why this is a little bit more onerous and why a number of clubs have adopted this, because they think it's a bit of a stiffer challenge. And what does it do? I guess it ensures that you put inside some kind of systematic process ahead of the 12-month expiry that, if you like, really limits the potential number of inspections falling outside a 12-month cycle. And that's all I want to say about that. Right, I'll just have a quick look, see if we've got any questions before we go. You'll be relieved to know we are going to overshoot, but I'm going to be very, very quick about things because I think this last slide is going to be quite quick. I'll just see if I can pick up any questions. So Kim Reagan is saying gas safety checks. If a block of 20 flats are on a communal gas heating system, do you count this as 20 properties? Again, this has not actually come up previously. I think what would be determining this is where the risk lies. So if there's a risk, the point about gas heating and safety checks is that each dwelling, what they've got in mind with the metric is that each dwelling has an individual gas boiler, and it's that gas appliance or whatever that is where the risk lies. So my feeling is that if there is simply one big communal gas heating system that's impacting, that's probably where the responsibility lies, if there is no risk to those individual properties. But Kim, again, if you can contact me outside of this and follow it up with my details, I'll look into it further. But off the top of my head, that would be my response to this specific question. That it really is about where the boiler and where the risk is. And Anthony's just got a question going back to the rent collection, which is, do we include overpaid rent as part of rent collection? Yes, you do. As part of the rent collection percentage, you are including that, because it's one of the vagaries of performance metrics. It has to have a definition, and because that metric is looking at what you've collected, you have collected that, even if it's an overpayment. So that is counted, but you wouldn't collect it, you wouldn't count it in the arrears figure, as said, because at the end of the day, that punter could ask for their money back. Right, okay, so guys, I'm conscious of the time. It was always going to be ambitious, this. So I'll crack through this satisfaction, the satisfaction metrics. So we really haven't got time to get into satisfaction methodology. We've done loads of webinars about survey methodology, this, that, and the other. Those recordings are available on our website, and we do plan on doing another one in May, so do watch out for them. But anyway, the way all these satisfaction metrics work is basically this. It's the basic calculation is the number of respondents who are very or fairly satisfied divided by the total number of respondents to that question. So it really is quite simple. The main satisfaction metrics that we collect are all from STAR. And the point that we make is that because they're taken from STAR, you should be adhering to the STAR methodology, which is comprehensive and tells you all that you need to know. And on my slides, just there, that is a hypertext link to the methodology. In a nutshell, the methodology states that each question has to be phrased very specifically, that there are 5 response categories with a neutral middle. And in that calculation there, we're obviously taking the top 2 responses, the 2 positive responses, which sit above the neutral, which is the very or fairly satisfied. The other key thing with the methodology is that you have appropriate sample sizes for your questions. And it's understood that for small organizations, it's really tough getting the sample sizes. And for many of you, it might mean that you're not messing about with sample sizes at all. You're doing a census, i.e. you are surveying all of your punters. For those of you that need it, I've got a hypertext link there to an online sample size calculator, but also alongside these, this presentation, I'll put an even easier to use spreadsheet that tells you what your sample sizes are for any given number of stock or whatever. So the data, any data that's collected as part of a methodologically sound STAR survey, whether you've got Acuity to do it or whether you've got somebody else to do it, or whether you've done it yourself, as long as you've adhered to that survey methodology, your results should be good to go. There are a few satisfaction metrics that aren't necessarily governed by STAR. And I'm talking about those of you that collect satisfaction with ASB or satisfaction with complaints, right? These metrics, you will be surveying all those people, because anybody that's received your ASB service or complaints, you'll be asking them, how was it for you, darling, sort of thing. And so where that's happening, by definition, not all of your tenants are complaining, not all of your tenants have got ASB. So you're going to have a small number of cases. It will always skew the results. You just have to bear that in mind. So you are going to get benchmarking results that are skewed by very low numbers. It does beg a question about whether you should be comparing them, really. So I'll leave that one fluttering with you. Again, you should be counting them and reporting them to board, and you certainly should be taking notice of the qualitative feedback from those people about, what was it they didn't like about your complaints process or your ASB process. But as I say, the numbers are so few that it would only take you might only have 5 people complaining or 5 ASB cases. And when you then start comparing those against others as percentages, just the way that those 5 people have responded will really skew things. So they are problematic, but they're there for you. I'm just simply flagging that numerically speaking, that they're problematic. As these new TSMs come online, it will have an impact on STAR. So what we're expecting over the next year, well, probably starting in summer, because the regulator will issue their decision statement on which way they're jumping with the TSMs in summer. And a number of the TSMs, half of the TSMs are based on satisfaction metrics. And there will need to be a harmonization of the regulatory guidance and STAR. So I'm simply flagging or preempting the question that yes, there will need to be a harmonization process between what the regulator is asking for and the way that STAR goes, because obviously nobody wants a level of difference and duplication there. And just a shameless plug there, that if you need any advice, help, or somebody to conduct your satisfaction surveys, obviously Acuity is a major satisfaction survey provider. We can help you with that, including helping you think through your strategy, how you're going to do it. Right, that's that. I just thought I'd sling this as a final slide. I think it is a final slide. Because I've mentioned the TSMs a little bit. I thought you might be interested in the timetable. So I think I've already said in summer, you can expect the regulator to publish their decision statement about it will be the final list of TSMs alongside their definitions and alongside their expectations of how you go about conducting surveys. So that means from late summer, like basically autumn 22 to spring 23, housing associations up and down the country near you will be preparing your system so that you can start measuring these metrics. What I can tell you is that we will be making them available on our website, on your data collection sheets from the autumn. So those of you that want to, if you like, dummy run or pilot the regulatory metrics before they're officially live, you can have a go practicing with those. So, so between this autumn and spring next year, you'll be preparing your systems and piloting perhaps. And then from next April 23 to 24, you'll be collecting the data as a regulatory requirement, which means that you'll be submitting that data to the regulator in summer 24, and the regulator will be publishing your data, the data in autumn 24. Now, I'm saying your data, it won't. It will be the sector's data. It will be all those associations that have 1,000 or more stock. Their data will be published. Any of you, which is the vast majority of you, with less than 1,000 stock, you will still be expected to publish this data to your tenants, but you're not actually expected to submit it to the regulator. But obviously, if you're collecting it with us, you've got the data there, so you can give it to your tenants so that you can consider it at board meetings, yada, yada, yada. So it goes on. And you'll be thankful to know that is it. I think I've just got one more question here at the moment. All right, so that's Kim just saying that she'll contact outside. So guys, I am sorry that I've overshot a bit. I'm also apologize for the absolute relentless pace of this, but I wanted to cover a lot of ground with the things that are the most important about getting these metrics right. As I say, there'll always be little bits around the edges, and we've got a couple of queries that I'm going to have to follow up around the edges. But certainly the content in this presentation, and as I say, it will be available for you, as will the recording. It is it's 90%, 95% at least of what you need to know to get these metrics right. So I do hope this has been helpful. Do bear in mind that if you're a glutton for punishment and you can take it, we've got another one of these on Friday that just looks at the regulatory metrics and our financial metrics that we come up, our cost metrics. So hopefully see you then. But otherwise, thanks for attending and have a nice day.